I know there are women that want to get married, that just the right person just hasn't come along, or even men. We can't just confine this to women. We're talking both that are single, that don't intend to stay single the rest of their lives.
Well, there's a wave of us. Actually, if you look at statistics about 40 years ago and you said, how many women, say between 25 and 34, were college educated and single? 1.6% of that population group, 25 to 34. Now it's almost 30%. So there's a whole wave of single women. A lot of the media impression is that these women are out living these hot party lives and having this great time on the town and don't want to get married. But statistics say that upwards of 80+% of those women would like to be married. So hence unintentionally single women, women who'd like to be married, but because they haven't met the right man, because of cultural circumstances, because of a whole host of reasons, find themselves single unintentionally.
And worried, many of them, about the season of childbearing passing them up in the process. I've heard a lot of talk and
well, I think
that.
Definitely, because there really is, though the childbearing years have been extended some, there really are those primary childbearing years, and once you've gone past them, you don't get them back. Now the average age of marrying is even above that, so clearly 25 isn't the age anymore. And I think people are even confused anymore. You know, the language of old maid or spinster, it's not really used, and I'm grateful for that, frankly. But the reality is, what is the right age to be married? How should I view marriage? What can I expect? I think there's a lot of confusion in our culture, and it's really not their fault or their fault. It's a widespread thing that characterizes the landscape of relationships.
It just seems suddenly a big drop-off into a different kind of world.
Well, I think it definitely is. There's definitely a change. If you look at my mother was married at 21, my grandmother at 22, another grandmother at 22, and so far back it goes that same way. Starting, I think, in about 1965, there's what one sociologist, Barbara Destowe Whitehead, calls the Girl Project began, which was really an emphasis culturally to create women who were freestanding and not dependent upon men economically or socially because of the rising divorce rate. And so many women were left in the lurch. And so in essence, though, what we've done is we've generated a whole generation of women who are, as she says, freestanding orchids, designed to be self-actualized, self-sufficient, but oftentimes act and live in isolation and subsequent loneliness.
There's the big word freedom that women were looking for, searching for, longing for, and yet has it, is it the great disillusionment? What about this freedom?
That's a super question. It's actually interesting. I read an article recently that said that Gen Y, which would be men and women who are aged 25 and below, are starting to consider the question of marrying earlier. That's because they've seen that the freedom, the completely unbounded freedom of the folks sort of 25 to 45 has created a lot of angst. I think I have a quote in there that says, freedom comes when we're secure in our harness. And in essence, people who maybe felt chained or enslaved, the people who read Betty Friedan when she first came out and were feeling all tight and I must break free, have gotten really free. But there's nothing that's grounding us. And I think what I'm saying is we need to discover what can ground us in the midst of our freedom, celebrating the freedom we have, but discovering what grounds us relationally with the Lord, in relationship with the opposite sex, and then as well with community.
About the question in your book, who needs men anyway? That kind of sounds arrogant and like, women have decided we can get along without them. You're not talking like that's not what you mean, is it?
No, actually the title is completely ironic. And I can always tell if people have read the book or not by the response to the title, because if they've read the chapter, they know that I come to the conclusion that both genders desperately need each other, that at the most fundamental level, we can't know God fully without knowing the image of God in the opposite gender. Yet the reality is, Dr. Frieda, in our culture, more and more women have been empowered and are choosing, sometimes out of hurt and sometimes out of deliberation, but choosing to live lives free of men. Increasingly, women capable of having children without a husband, women who don't need men for socioeconomic position anymore. And so it is actually a real question in our culture. Ironically, the sword between the sexes seems to grow even as theoretically we have more sexual freedom than ever before.
That and we were talking about freedom in general, which leads me to the whole subject of sexual freedom. First of all, I think the whole idea that you don't want to dry up and be non-sexual just because you're single. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
I said in the book that one of my great fears if I didn't marry and I wasn't having sex outside of marriage, which I'm not, was that I would somehow get withered and just have some, a few spare pets around me, and I'd start wearing like ugly sweaters and things like that. And really the joy and the discovery as I embarked on writing the book, but as I've talked to so many people, is realizing that what keeps somebody alive as a human being, and our sexuality is part of that, is when we're giving ourselves away. And I mean that in healthy ways.
Sure.
And that Mother Teresa, said one writer, was a sexual dynamo because she kept alive and harnessed that energy and that passion, but was using it for something bigger than herself.
I love that. I don't think it's a matter of not having the sexual needs or the sexual desires, the passions, because I think we all need to be passionate people, even engaged in extending the kingdom of God. I want that passion, and where does passion leave off, and so forth. But I think it's the whole idea of harnessing normal, natural desires and needs.
Right, and to say that our longing and our desire for connection is a God-given desire.
Yes.
It's not something
He made us for relationship.
nasty or dirty or bad. But then the reality is you live in the culture in which you live, and you want to make wise choices wherever you are in that culture. And so you ask, I mean, really for me it's been saying, God, what do I do with that energy? Where do I pour it out in a way that's honoring to you?
Now, Connally, we're talking about, we've already talked about that women do need men. God created us to need each other. That was his game plan from the beginning. So we can just leave that and move on. But I do want, there's something you say in your book that I want to reference, and that is, you mentioned living the life that you didn't expect to live. In other words, you expected to be like your mom, your life to continue for another generation like your mom. You want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I basically grew up thinking, well, I'll be like my mom and my grandmother, except maybe a little bit different because it's a different culture. But I didn't have a vision for creating a life as a single adult woman. That was never my goal. I mean, I had some ideas of what I'd want to do vocationally, but never had a sense of, oh, this is the career I wanted to do or be about. So a lot of what I've been doing has been going almost through an uncharted landscape, figuring it out one step at a time, and trying to discover in that process where God is showing up and how he leads.
So, and you feel you've come along that path. You're not there yet. You said in your book, and this word's being used a lot these days, nirvana. You're not there yet. Well, of course, that's really not your goal, is it? Your goal is an inner peace and knowing that you're where God would have you be at this season in your life. You basically say that in your book. And there is peace and tranquility in that, isn't there?
I think definitely. I think for me, because I think it's partially being raised in the South, there's just the presumption you'll be married. There's, I think, a God-given desire for it. And so when it doesn't happen, part of it is asking the question, is there something wrong with me? Then you work through that, and then you say, well, God, why? And I think really where I've come to is believing that God is good and he's real and he's showing up, even in a cultural landscape that looks nothing like I predicted. And really, I think there's so much change going on in our country on so many different levels. That's what people need to hear, is that even in the chaos or when it doesn't look like you expected, there is a real God who's good and who's showing up.
And he's in control.
And he is in control. And he's not threatened or scared or fearful of...
So, now, do you think maybe women getting educated, going to college, getting educated, having careers, they're just kind of, as it were, pulled into the system and become a part of it without an awareness of what is happening?
Yeah, I think there's so many things, Dr. Frieda, going on in so many different levels. But in essence, there's no guarantee you'll get married. So you want to pursue meaningful work, and meaningful work that pays something. So you pursue that. Well, it demands more of your time, but then do you stop doing it because it demands more of your time, so you free yourself up for a marriage that might not happen? So those are the kind of things that are, I think, shaping women's decisions. Simultaneously, I think men are confused about how to relate to women, particularly women who have a lot of education. The reality is that men typically will marry with an equivalent, a woman with an equivalent degree or a less degree. Well, women now make up 55 to 60%, depending whose statistics you prefer, of a college student population. So women are being educated either 4 to 3 or 3 to 2 over men. So you have these factors all conspiring. Women control 51% of the wealth in this country. That changes the landscape as well. So I think, yes, there's a lot of unintentionality that is going on with people finding themselves in a situation they didn't expect, but it is really the whole culture that looks this way.
So that brings me to the question that everybody asks you. You say you're unintentionally single.
Right.
Well, why aren't you married?
Well, I have a whole chapter entitled, So Why Aren't You Married? Because you get that question. And the real bottom line is, I don't know. I mean, really, if I'm going to be honest, I really don't know. I do know this, though, that oftentimes when people ask Jesus the why question, for example, why was that man born blind? Was it something he did or something his parents did? At the end of the day, Jesus said, he was born blind so that the work of God might be demonstrated in his life today. And that's the answer that I cling to, is that for today, I am where God has me. I want his work to be demonstrated in and through my life. If that comes through singleness, and that's what brings him glory, cool. If it comes through marriage, I'd be really excited about that too.
So you're just really you're in a good position as far as I can, as a psychotherapist, and how we're talking to you, I just say, you know, you're really in a good stage, a good way in your life. You're open to whatever God has for you. And it must be very exciting.
It is exciting, but I'll say honestly, part of the way I've been able to get there is I've been given permission to ache and to name the grief. Because I think there is something about not having the husband of your youth, for somebody who would like that, that is grievous.
But what is youth anymore? That even has to be redefined.
We'll say within childbearing years. And I'm 41, so I'm kind of getting at that edge. And so people have given me permission to ache and to scream and to be uncomfortable. And
lonely. We didn't
and
talk
to be
about
lonely.
that.
They've given me permission to be lonely. And what I've discovered is in that posture of saying the truth about where I really am, both God and the people around me can show up and love me in ways that maybe I would have even been a little standoffish to historically, but I've been open to, and I've seen God and other people show up and love me in really good ways.